If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Today we are talking about a typical coincidence theorist so-called argumentation tactic. Stop talking about XYZ. And there are various issues there. And in typical MINDSHOCK fashion, we'll be exploring what those are and why those are, with logic and reason at the forefront, as always. If you enjoy the MINDSHOCK podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, and make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. And then if you're still not getting them, you can just go to youtube.com/MINDSHOCK to see all the latest podcasts and videos. You can check us out, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analyses, requests, co-podcaster requests, and depending on your tier, you could also be a guest on the podcast. If you like this particular podcast, hit that like button, share it across social media platforms. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, or debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. All right, so what am I talking about when I say XYZ? Well, one of the common things, especially on MINDSHOCK, is stop talking about logical fallacies. So you see goofballs that are triggered, they use that one a lot, particularly in some of the true crime cases even, where certain triggered individuals, either narrative steerers in certain cases or just people who are not very good at critical thinking, deductive reasoning, or logic of any kind, they don't like that pointed out. Their ego can't handle it. So it's easier for them to say, well, stop talking about logical fallacies. Well, what are logical fallacies? Logical fallacies help keep a conversation or discussion or argument of any kind on the tracks of validity. So if you're a train and you're going off the tracks, and there are means to keep the train on the tracks, why would you not utilize those means? I mean, that's really what logical fallacies are. You're just calling foul. Wait a second, that's not going to stay on the tracks of validity, because what is logic itself? Strict principles of validity is what logic entails. Again, it's not that difficult. We're not talking rocket science here. If some of these coincidence theorists are simply illogical individuals, those part of the cognitive dissonant masses, or those that have trouble keeping up, those hopelessly indoctrinated to the cult of scientism, if they just took a break from their keeping up with the Kardashian watching or Netflix watching, they just take 10 minutes out of that a day, they can really get to at least a children's level understanding of logic and logical fallacies, and then they wouldn't be clamoring for people to stop discussing logic or logical fallacies. Like if you're having an English conversation with somebody and you're like, stop using vowels. I mean, it's just so silly because vowels are an integral part of English words. So not that it's completely impossible to have some kind of gibberish-based discussion. I mean, I don't know. But if you're trying to have a valid discussion, a grammatically correct discussion, you're going to need to use vowels. That's just the way it is. Same thing if you're discussing any topic. And the whole point of a podcast, being logical analysis, whether it's a paranormal topic or a true crime topic, you're going to ask people on a logical podcast not to use logical fallacies. I mean, some of these goofballs on social media are just really astounding regarding their dunning-kruger issues. I'll be obviously doing a dedicated episode on the dunning-kruger effect, and that's another thing that people say, stop talking about dunning-kruger. Well, if that's the most common issue, a particular individual, if I'm doing a logical analysis on a video, whether it's scientism priests versus flat earthers, whichever side is being stupid, whatever, if I'm calling out the dunning-kruger because that particular individual is too incompetent to realize they're incompetent, if that's the primary issue, why would you not point that out? If that's the primary issue. And the reason a lot of these triggered goofballs keep saying, well, stop talking about dunning-kruger, stop talking about logical fallacies, it's really strange because they don't realize, again, it's their psychological projection, which is actually another thing that people say, well, stop talking about that. But if that's the primary issue, and if that's going to resolve the problem, like if someone's dehydrated but they also possibly have other health issues, they go to the hospital. I mean, they hook them up to an IV. They get some fluids in them because, yeah, it's not that they might not have other issues, but the dehydration is such a major issue. It might be the primary obstacle to survival. That's why you get hooked up to fluids. That's why they give you an IV. It's not that you don't have other issues. It's not that other issues don't exist. It's not that they won't be discussed or gotten to. It's just there's a certain hierarchy when it comes to prioritizing survival. So in any kind of logical analysis, if the main issue is the dunning-kruger, or the main issue is the lack of logical comprehension, it's not that there aren't other issues. It's not that other issues shouldn't be discussed, but it's almost a moot point if they can't get through step 1 or step 2. I mean, another analogy we could use is if someone is, let's say, wants to go play basketball, but they don't know how to walk or run. So if you want to teach a 6-month-old how to play basketball, it might not work. It might not work. I'm just saying. Or even an adult with the motor skills of a 3-month-old, there's a certain hierarchy. Not that they won't be able to do it in the future. That's not what I'm saying in any way. Definitely they can, and the only way they can is if the order of issues is prioritized properly. So they have to be able to walk, run, dribble, shoot, all those things if they're playing basketball. If you don't like a basketball analogy, I mean, we can go football. What about ice hockey if you don't know how to skate? I mean, you could try to pull a Happy Gilmore, but if you don't know, if you can't grip a hockey stick, I mean, there's only so much you can do, so you have to go through the priorities. If you identify the most major issues, you handle those first, which will enable you to get to the other issues. Again, I'm not pretending the other issues don't exist. And the goal, of course, is not to make fun of people, although obviously humor is subjective, and I happen to find dunning-kruger comedy stylings quite amusing, psychological projection, triggering, all these psychological issues of coincidence theorists and illogical individuals due to their hopeless indoctrination to the cult of state and authority worship and scientism. I find it amusing. That doesn't mean other people do, but the whole point, everything I discuss on the podcast, it's to help move the discussion forward in a logical fashion. Yeah, maybe I laugh a little too much along the way. Again, that's subjective. Some people think I do. Some people think I don't. Some people don't care because they're not here whether they don't care whether certain people find certain things amusing. They're here for the actual discussion and the point's gone over, so they don't care either way. But anyway, these are issues. If those are the primary issues to overcome, they need to be called out. Otherwise, they will never be overcome. I mean, the silliness, again, that just proves the point with, again, the Dunning-Kruger. If they're not competent enough to understand that, how can they understand something else? I mean, they might accidentally, but again, it's kind of moot because you'll never be efficient in any kind of conversation if you can't identify your own deficiencies. Now, that's why I'm constantly talking about objective, empirically verifiable definitions, because it has nothing to do with me or my Dunning-Kruger, my Dunning-Kruger issues. The entire motto of the podcast is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. So I'm not saying anything is true or untrue. I'm just calling out objective definitions and attempting not to fall for logic fallacies of any kind. I'm a human being. I might fall for logic fallacies. I even call them out when I do fall for them. I even call them out preemptively because sometimes I recognize that I'm going to use one, and I use it anyway as food for thought, not necessarily trying to prove something true or untrue, because again, the whole basis is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. So I hope that addressed some of the triggered goofballs out there that keep saying, stop talking about logical fallacies, stop talking about Dunning-Kruger effects, stop talking about psychological projection. And it's very telling because whatever triggers them the most, if they don't have any actual logical points, if their argument has no merit, all they have are these fallacies, of course they're not going to want them called out because then they have nothing at all. Then all they could do, they have their ad hominem attacks, and that's pretty much all they have. So if all they have are logical fallacies, they would prefer someone making them look stupid would not talk about logical fallacies because then they won't look that stupid. Again, it goes back to the ego triggering. And the dunning-kruger effect, of course, if they don't want to confront even the possibility that they're not competent to notice their own incompetence, to realize they're not competent enough to understand a particular point or issue, why would they want that pointed out? Again, very damaging to the ego. But if they actually do take these possibilities to heart, again, I'm not even saying it's definitely true or untrue, but because I don't know the exact severity of anybody's suffrage from the Dunning-Kruger effect, but if they continue demonstrating post after post, or they're making their post illustrates that they didn't even comprehend what was being put forth, let alone making a valid counter argument, because you can't. How can you make a counter argument to something you don't even understand, unless you're just regurgitating talking points from the idiot box, which is what most coincidence theorist goofballs do. But the final thing I was going to discuss, the final point, is indoctrination and the psychology of cults, because people don't want that talked about either, because again, they're on such short strings of their ego. And nobody wants that pointed out, because not only does that make them look silly, but it makes them, again, it points out that they were hoodwinked. As Mark Twain allegedly once said, it's easier to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled. And so these psychological issues, the cult of scientism, if these are the primary obstacles preventing one from understanding a particular argument being put forth, should they not be called out? And it's very telling when certain individuals want you to stop talking about XYZ, any of these issues that they find triggering personally. And again, the people that don't say that and actually engage, regardless of whether they understand or not, they might change their argumentation tactics or whatnot based on these things being pointed out. They're obviously less triggered, but it's very telling, the triggering itself. And then some people even say, stop talking about triggering. Well, clearly they are triggered. So again, all of these things, very, very telling when people try to fascistically shut down certain things being pointed out. Again, due to their own insecurities, due to the subconscious recognizing the truth of these points being put forth, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. It's like that old saying goes, if you make people think they're thinking, they'll love you. If you make people really think, they will hate you. Because nobody wants to really think deep about anything, because then all of these ego, it's like there's all these minds. Your mind is a minefield. And anything that trips that ego, for most people who haven't studied psychology, logical fallacies, all these things, it's really not that difficult. Like I said, this is not rocket science. This is children's level understanding. And a lot of times, children don't have, I mean, some children do, but a lot of children, they're kind of, because they're expected to be children and not really know anything, there are less issues with the ego. I mean, they still throw their little tantrums. I want this. I don't get what I want. Wah. But in general, they don't really feel stupid when they don't understand particular points that they feel society as a whole should make them. I mean, maybe they do, like if they can't tie their shoes in their whatever age. But in general, conceptually, when talking about concepts or ideas and putting them forth or understanding them, with children, their ego gets less in the way. And then as an adult, of course, your ego has grown to a particular point. And if you haven't studied specifically how to overcome it, it's going to trip you up, and you're going to get triggered when people point that out. They point all these things out. So again, thank you for all the MindShock listeners out there, not just those that appreciate logical discussion on these topics not being discussed anywhere else. Coincidence theorists versus conspiracy theorists. And that's even another thing. I could throw that out too. There's some people that are so triggered, they don't even like me using the term coincidence theorist, because again, their subconscious is triggered because they realize how apt it is, because they would rather believe in endless coincidences than think that humans might be corrupt or criminals might not work alone. corruption or incompetence in certain authorities is just an impossibility in their minds. They would prefer infinite coincidences be true, and they would rather buy into that to soothe their cognitive dissonance and their very fragile faith-based worldviews just built on these fairy tales for adults, aka mainstream narratives. So it's very, very telling, very, very obvious, but I just wanted to touch upon that for those that it's not. And again, thanks to all the MindShock listeners, and thanks to all the MindShock haters out there. There would be a lot less content without you guys. So again, thanks to all the trolls, the steers, the obfuscators, the triggered coincidence theorists, and cognitive dissonant masses that continue to comment and prove and illustrate these points that I'm putting forth. And again, they're unintentionally proving all these points true, but that in and of itself has merit. So thank you to all you goofballs out there as well. As always, if you enjoy the MindShock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through, or you can just go to youtube.com/MindShock to see all the latest podcasts and videos. If you like this particular podcast, hit that like button, share it across social media platforms. Let's start to reintroduce the nearly extinct logic and reason that once was probably more prevalent in society. If you have thoughts on that, you can leave that in the comment section as well as any other thoughts, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind. That's what the comment section is for. You could also check us out: Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons will get priority for case, topic, logical analyses, requests, co-podcaster requests, or you could be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.